The story centers on a young gambler named Mark, who was currently in a truly dire situation after losing a massive bet. Not only had Mark squandered his money, but he'd also managed to ruin his entire life by engaging in such reckless activities. Just a few weeks before Mark hit rock bottom, he was a regular at a certain casino. However, he wasn't there to gamble legally himself. Instead, he was constantly on the hunt for easy prey. He'd meticulously observe various potential targets, often zeroing in on beginners who were not strong enough for the intense pressures of gambling. Once he successfully found a mark, Mark would casually invite them to play, all while the unsuspecting novice remained completely unaware that this was a carefully orchestrated trick designed to ensnare them and ultimately strip them of all their money. Surprisingly, beneath that seemingly ruthless exterior, Mark was actually a devoted son. This loyalty was evident in how he always used his ill-gotten gains to pay for his ailing mother's medical treatments. His mother desperately needed a blood donation, and the price tag for it was astronomical. One day, as Mark was heading to his usual casino, an older gentleman approached him and challenged him to a simple coin toss bet. Though Mark initially hesitated, the sheer size of the wager, combined with the old man's seemingly amateur demeanor, convinced Mark he had an easy win on his hands. As fate would have it, the old man was none other than Hansen, the actual owner of the casino where Mark had been scamming people. Before Hansen departed, he gave Mark a strict 7-day deadline to clear all his debts and immediately instructed all security personnel to permanently ban Mark from the premises. Following this dramatic incident at the casino, Mark desperately hatched a new scheme. He planned to kidnap Hansen's daughter for ransom. He didn't need a fortune, just enough to settle his debt with Hansen within the strict 7-day window. From a distance, he intently watched Hansen's daughter, Beatrice, who left her home in a rather sneaky manner. Mark discreetly followed her from behind before executing his plan. However, instead of successfully kidnapping her, he found himself nearly at death's door at Beatrice's own hands. In a bizarre twist, rather than harming the person attempting to kidnap him, Beatrice instead invited Mark to join him for a meal at a nearby 24-hour restaurant. At the restaurant, Beatrice quite casually suggested that Mark should just go kidnap someone else. She candidly explained that Mark wouldn't get a dime from her, because despite her father being immensely wealthy, he never truly considered her a daughter. Deep down, she even confessed that her father secretly wished she would just die. Upon arriving home, Mark discovered he had been followed by Beatrice, who pleaded to stay the night. Mark reluctantly agreed, but only on the condition that she behaved himself and didn't touch anything without permission. Once he felt Beatrice was settled, Mark rushed into his mother's room to change the blood bag, ensuring the transfusion continued smoothly. However, seeing only 2 blood bags left, Mark immediately headed to the black market pharmacy where he usually bought the blood. Just as he arrived, Mark was suddenly abducted by Hansen, who threatened him, demanding that he pay off his debt before the due date. Hansen ominously warned that if the money wasn't returned by the deadline, he would sell all of Mark's internal organs on the black market. After returning home from his terrifying ordeal, Mark immediately threw Beatrice out. He was utterly scared by what had just happened to him. That's when he suddenly remembered Beatrice's words from their first conversation at the restaurant. Beatrice had, in fact, suggested that Mark kidnap him, assuring him that the ransom money could be used entirely by Mark without sharing a single penny. With no other options left, Mark finally told Beatrice to come back inside. He agreed to the kidnapping Beatrice had proposed, and the two quickly began to devise a meticulous scheme, making sure every detail would make the abduction appear absolutely genuine. After settling on one of their many elaborate plans, Mark initiated the action by sending Beatrice's jacket to Hansen's home. He then sent a chat message to Hansen via an overseas website to avoid police tracking. Beatrice demanded a ransom of 10 million yen from her father, though Mark himself wasn't entirely on board with such a high amount. To satisfy his nagging curiosity, Mark questioned Beatrice about why she would go to such extreme lengths. Beatrice explained that she simply wanted to be a daughter loved by her parents, free to do as she pleased, not perpetually confined indoors like a caged bird, much like Mark's pet bird himself, currently trapped in its own cage. Some time passed. Mark received a message that made his heart pound with anticipation, but to his dismay, it was only spam, an advertisement inviting him to play on a gambling site. As time continued to tick by with no reply from Hansen, Mark became desperate and went to monitor the man's house. However, just as he arrived, Mark was forced to retreat after receiving a notification on his phone. It was an alert for his mother's condition. Upon arriving home, he immediately saw his mother, who, thankfully, was perfectly fine. That feeling of relief, however, was short-lived, as he was greeted with a surprising treat, a delicious meal, which horrifyingly turned out to be his own pet bird. As he was still angry, he realized that Hansen was heading to his house. Mark quickly hid Beatrice in his mother's room, preventing Hansen from finding his daughter, who was currently in there. As Hansen entered the house, the two men locked eyes, a silent standoff. In that crucial moment, Hansen's curiosity was piqued by a locked door. He then asked Mark to open it and reveal what was behind it. Thankfully, Beatrice wasn't hiding there when it was opened. It was just a closet. After Hansen left, Mark immediately went to get Beatrice so they could leave. To Mark's utter shock, he found his ailing mother lying on the floor, her legs bleeding profusely. After performing emergency first aid, Mark finally confessed the truth about the woman he cared for. She wasn't his mother at all, but rather the director of an orphanage. Mark was an orphan himself, rescued by this kind director. She provided him with a home, food, and an education all the way through high school. Until one day, Mark made a grave mistake that severely impacted the foundation where he lived. What he actually did remained unclear. But one by one, the orphanage's donors began to withdraw their support. To feed the children, the director was forced to scavenge for scraps, even venturing into chemical factory environments. It was this relentless hard work that tragically led to her diagnosis with a blood disorder. For her survival, Mark had to constantly provide fresh blood for transfusions, as she now required a massive amount of blood cells. While Mark was recounting this heartbreaking story, he suddenly received a message from Hansen. The casino owner was proposing a game of chance between them, with the winner taking all. After this unexpected contact ended, Beatrice suddenly remembered a final message she had sent to a friend in a nearby city. Apparently, before coming to Mark's place, she had intended to stay at her friend's house. But because she received no reply and her money and phone battery were almost depleted, she decided to go to Mark's instead. The problem now was that with this message, the police could easily locate her friend, who would most likely report the kidnapping to the authorities once they realized their friend was missing. This would instantly expose the elaborate lie about the abduction. The very next morning, they immediately set off to meet Beatrice's friend. Upon arrival, Beatrice went straight to her friend's apartment, while Mark opted to wait in the car. Just moments after Beatrice left, another car accidentally bumped into Mark's, and the owner began knocking on his window, profusely apologizing. Soon after, a police officer also approached to assist the apologizing driver. Mark, thinking on his feet, pretended to be on an important phone call, completely ignoring both of them, determined to catch up with Beatrice, who had already finished her business. Mark quickly took Beatrice to a nearby hotel, and there he instructed her to send a message to her father, one imbued with a touch of drama to make the kidnapping seem utterly convincing. Mark did this because he had just received a message from Hansen, who wanted to know if his daughter was doing well. After receiving this dramatic message from Beatrice, Hansen finally began to soften. He asked Mark to ensure Beatrice remained safe and promised to comply with all of Mark's demands as long as his daughter wasn't harmed. With the business with Hansen seemingly settled, Beatrice began to flirt with Mark, leaning against his back. This unexpected move clearly made Mark falter, revealing a budding affection for Beatrice, who was now right there with him. His feeling, fortunately, was two-sided, as Beatrice also began to feel the same for him. That evening, Mark brought Beatrice to the mountain area, fulfilling Beatrice's wish to revisit childhood memories of her father taking her there. Though the memories with her father weren't as perfect as she might have imagined, at least she still had something to cherish. While there, Beatrice inquired about the ransom money and what Mark planned to do with it. Mark explained that the funds were for his mother's medical expenses, hoping to find a miracle cure to finally heal her. On the day that Hansen would give the ransom money, Mark gave Beatrice a smart band to wear as a tracking device. A worried Beatrice then asked if Mark would go with her to move to another country, to Brazil, once everything was over. Mark didn't refuse, but he didn't accept it either, knowing deep down he couldn't actually go anywhere, given his mother's constant need for care. On the other hand, Hansen was seen preparing his daughter's ransom money, with Mark instructing him to deliver it to a place he had picked. Though Hansen appeared to be alone, he was in fact being tailed by a significant number of police officers. Despite this, Mark stuck to his plan, knowing there was no turning back. To shake off the police tailing Hansen, Mark had devised an incredibly simple yet surprisingly effective strategy. Once successfully evaded the police, Mark instructed Hansen to go to a hotel rooftop and throw the money down, where someone would immediately pick it up. As it turned out, the person collecting the money was none other than Beatrice herself. Upon arriving at the rendezvous point where Beatrice and Mark were meant to meet, an unexpected individual approached them. Beatrice seemed to recognize the person, and vice versa, a development that threatened to unravel their entire scheme. Once they were safely back at their hideout, Mark tied Beatrice's hands and left her to be picked up by her father. Mark initially intended to retrieve the smart band he had given Beatrice earlier, but Beatrice chose to keep it as a final memento before their paths truly diverged. On his way home, Mark, unfortunately, got into a car accident, but fortunately, he made it out alive. He then found his mother crawling on the floor from the CCTV in her room, bleeding from what appeared to be a fall. His string of bad luck didn't end there. After rushing his mother to the hospital, Mark received devastating news from Hansen. Beatrice's body had been found on the mountain. Thus, in addition to the kidnapping, Mark now found himself facing a murder case, a fact already confirmed by the police. Mark couldn't deny his involvement, even though he wasn't the perpetrator. But when Beatrice's image appeared on the news, Mark finally realized he had been tricked. He noticed the girl on the screen was different from what he saw. Tragically, his mother was also pronounced dead. As Mark grappled with the relentless string of misfortunes that had befallen him, his mother's death hit him particularly hard. Overwhelmed with grief and anger, he trashed his home, finding some twisted solace in the chaos, along with a recording his mother had made shortly before she passed. 3 days later, Beatrice showed up at Mark's place, seeking forgiveness for everything that had transpired. Mark, cutting straight to the chase, demanded Beatrice's real name. Beatrice then revealed his true identity. She was Chloe, the sister of Beatrice, her deceased sibling. Chloe explained that Beatrice had been a drug addict. As a loving sister, Chloe had once confiscated the drugs from her. Enraged, Beatrice retaliated by threatening and even choking Chloe, demanding her drugs back. Hansen, who soon showed up, tried to break up the fight, but unfortunately, he accidentally pushed Beatrice. She hit her head and dropped dead on the spot. When Chloe attempted to call an ambulance, he harshly forbade her, deliberately letting Beatrice die. There was a cold, calculated reason behind this. Hansen's reputation had already been severely tarnished by his younger daughter's problem of being a drug addict. On top of that, Hansen was about to run for mayor, so his daughter's death was not only inconsequential to him, but actually a calculated advantage for a smooth campaign. It was revealed that the man who had approached Mark and Chloe earlier after taking the ransom money was Beatrice's boyfriend, the very person who had dragged her into the world of drugs. He was the one rotten apple who had put Hansen in his current difficult predicament. The narrative then went back in time to when Mark was still scamming people at Hansen's casino. It turned out Hansen had been fully aware of all Mark's tricks from the get-go. He hadn't bothered to intervene, believing Mark to be a clever kid. However, after that pivotal incident that claimed his younger daughter's life, he started seeing Mark as the perfect scapegoat. That's when he initiated his elaborate game, with himself as the mastermind. Realizing that everything he and Chloe had gone through was nothing but a manipulative game, Mark could only despair over his current fate, alongside the bird who turned out to be still alive. A few days later, Chloe went to a place with lockers, following Mark's instructions to collect her share of the ransom money. The money was surprisingly untouched. Mark hadn't taken a single penny, claiming he didn't need it. Later, Mark himself was kidnapped by Hansen. Still reeling from the day's revelations, Mark questioned Hansen, wanting to understand how he had truly won. Hansen calmly explained that from their very first meeting, he had deliberately maneuvered Mark into digging his own grave. Mark, feeling increasingly cornered, had only delved deeper into the elaborate scheme, utilizing all his skills and getting utterly swept away in the drama. Hansen allowed Mark to escape, letting him take the ransom money. However, Mark, still reeling, pressed Hansen about his mother's death, which had clearly been unnatural. Hansen indirectly admitted to being her murderer. The next morning, Mark watched Chloe from across the building where she worked. He immediately called her and offered to take her to Brazil with him, revealing he'd already bought 2 tickets for them. From that moment on, Chloe began to seriously ponder her next move. Ultimately, she convinced herself to leave her father and her life of luxury behind, choosing instead to be with Mark, the person she had truly liked since first sight. Meanwhile, Hansen, who was being questioned by the police about her younger daughter's kidnapping and murder, received a phone call. The caller informed him that his second daughter was also kidnapped. Hansen immediately assumed Mark was behind it, seeking revenge. He promptly called Mark, challenging him to another coin toss game. This time Mark chose heads. Chloe couldn't find Mark at the airport. She then remembered the smart band Mark gave her. She checked the signal and found Mark at a nearby hotel. She immediately rushed over. She chose to confront Mark, feeling betrayed. Upon learning that Mark was still playing a game with her father, she revealed that Hansen was currently with the police and they were on their way to their location. She didn't realize that Mark had calculated this from the very beginning. As it turned out, the person Hansen had been visiting was none other than Beatrice's boyfriend, the drug addict. Mark had been giving him a fake location. With this revelation, Hansen's mayoral aspirations were officially dead in the water, as the police would undoubtedly launch a thorough investigation into him and discover the truth about Beatrice's situation as a drug addict. With this resounding success, Mark finally breathed a sigh of relief. He had successfully avenged his mother's death. However, Chloe didn't seem to approve of Mark's methods. Even so, their undeniable love for each other melted Beatrice's resolve, and she decided to go with Mark to Brazil after all.